The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, folded in an elegant ivory envelope, and hand-delivered to Elon Musk's office in central Pretoria. At first, he thought it was another investment proposal or perhaps an invitation to speak at conference. But when he opened it, the nostalgia hit like a gust of wind through a cracked window. The envelope contained a simple card with embossed letters. "You are cordially invited to the Moonlight Club's 40th anniversary celebration. Saturday, 8 p.m. 23, Mahlangu Street." Elon leaned back in his chair. His fingers brushed the edge of the card, but his mind had already traveled 2 decades into the past. The Moonlight Club. That name still held weight in his chest. It wasn't a club in the traditional sense. It was a gathering, a ritual, a safe haven for dreamers, thinkers, and people who refused to let age define the limits of their hearts. He hadn't been back in nearly 15 years. "Should I RSVP, sir?" asked Lindive, his ever-efficient assistant. Elon hesitated. "No need," he said quietly. "They'll know I'm coming." Pretoria had changed, roads widened, buildings polished, neighborhoods gentrified, but the small white building on Mahlangu Street was untouched by time. That Saturday, Elon drove himself there, no driver, no security detail. Just him, a flask of brandy in his jacket pocket, and the weight of memories pressing into his ribs. When he stepped through the familiar gate, time folded. The same jacaranda tree stretched its limbs above the courtyard, petals like violet snowflakes covering the floor. Soft laughter and the smell of roast lamb greeted him before any words did. Inside, a group of elders were already gathered. Some in wheelchairs, others propped with canes or walking arms in arms. A few looked up and stared. "Elon?" asked a trembling voice. He turned. There stood Thabo, once the club's master of ceremonies, now thinner and bent, but with the same spark in his eyes. "Elon Musk. My God, I thought you'd forgotten us." "I almost did," Elon said with a half-smile. But then this showed up. Thabo embraced him, surprisingly firm. "You're just in time. Nothing's changed except us." And he was right. The interior of the building looked exactly as he remembered. Old photos in crooked frames, fading curtains, a grand piano that hadn't been tuned since Mandela's first term. The smell of polish and age, of stories thick in the walls. There were new faces, too. A younger generation of caretakers like Ntombi, a bright-eyed university student volunteering at the club. She guided Elon to a corner table where an empty chair waited for him, beside others who had once shared dreams under the stars. He spotted Dinio, his high school dance partner, now sporting silver hair and a laugh that hadn't aged a day. And Mpho, who used to recite poetry after 2 glasses of wine, and still did, apparently. As the evening deepened, stories flowed more freely. Music played, tangos, waltzes, and forgotten local ballads, and the floor filled with cautious but heartfelt dancing. And Elon, the man known worldwide for rockets and Mars, leaned against a cracked window, watching joy unfold a room he once escaped from, only to return and find a part of himself he never knew he'd missed. It was close to midnight when Mpho approached Elon again. The Moonlight Club had quieted into its second rhythm, the slow, tender one that followed laughter and dancing. Outside, the jacaranda petals had begun to carpet the courtyard, glowing softly under the orange street lamps. Inside, the record player crackled with a gentle jazz tune, and people leaned closer when they spoke, not out of necessity, but because intimacy had returned to the room. Elon was seated by the bookshelf, thumbing through a dusty anthology of South African poets. The pages smelled of age and smoke, and his fingertips brushed over a familiar name, Mpho Khumalo. Her poem, Midnight in Mahikeng, brought back the memory of a night long ago, one filled with fireflies and fevered whispers, one where poetry felt as alive as electricity. She stood before him now, steadying herself with a carved wooden cane that looked like it had stories of its own. Her silver hair was swept back into a loose bun, and her eyes, those sharp honey-brown eyes, still had the power to pierce through pretense. "You still thinking in algorithms, Elon?" she asked, easing down into the chair beside him. He looked up, smiling. "Sometimes. Old habits die hard." I remember when you tried to prove that heartbreak followed a logarithmic pattern. We were what, 22? 23. And I was insufferable. No, she grinned. You were brave enough to think the world made sense. That's rare. They sat quietly for a moment, the silence full of warmth rather than awkwardness. Across the room, Dinio laughed loudly, her voice echoing like it had when they were young. Thabo was dozing off in his chair, and Ntombi was helping fold linens near the kitchen. The room felt like a photograph suspended in time. Mpho reached into her purse and pulled out a faded photograph, protected by a piece of plastic. She handed it to Elon. It was an image from the early days of the Moonlight Club, 15 young adults dancing under a homemade canopy of white fabric and string lights. Elon was in the background, looking off to the side, as if half there. You remember this night? She asked softly. He stared at the photo for a long time. I remember the music. I remember you wore blue earrings. Wrong, she chuckled. They were turquoise feathers. And you told me they looked like miniature rocket fins. He laughed. That sounds like me. You were always looking up, she said, tapping her cane gently on the floor, while the rest of us were looking at each other. There was something in her voice, not resentment, but a gentle longing, as if she were watching someone walk barefoot along the edge of something beautiful, refusing to dive in. You ever regret staying here, Mpho? He asked. Never, she said without hesitation. This place gave me a language, a place to be myself. I built a family here. Elon looked around. I spent most of my life thinking family had to do with DNA or obligation. I never thought it could be a choice. Mpho smiled. It's always a choice, Elon. That's the power of it. The conversation grew deeper. She told him about the years when the club nearly closed, about water leaks, stolen funding, people passing away. And yet it endured. Because of the love people gave it. Because it was more than a building. It was a memory that kept reinventing itself. And now, he asked, what do you need? She hesitated. You know that rooftop garden we started in '99? It's dying. We don't have the strength or the money to keep it going. The kids help when they can, but... He cut her off gently. I'll come tomorrow. We'll fix it. Together. Mpho looked at him, and for a moment, her eyes shimmered. You still carry guilt, don't you? He nodded slightly. You don't owe us penance, Elon. Just presence. That sentence stayed with him as she stood up and walked away, slower than before but with her head held high. He remained seated, holding the photograph between his fingers like it was a key to a door he had once locked himself out of. Outside, the breeze moved the jacaranda petals again. He stepped into the courtyard and looked up at the sky. No rockets, no satellites, just the old moon glowing softly, like a silent witness to the second chances we give ourselves when we finally decide to return. The following morning, Pretoria was awash in soft golden light, the kind that warmed without overwhelming, and Elon arrived early at the Moonlight Club just as dew still kissed the petals of the jacarandas. There was no chauffeur, no press, no announcements. Just him in work shoes and rolled-up sleeves, his mind curiously quiet for once. He walked up the rusted staircase that groaned underfoot and emerged onto the rooftop. The garden was worse than he remembered. Dry soil cracked like old skin. Pots were chipped, some broken. A few wooden crates lay upturned, housing nothing but ants and the ghosts of plants that once fed them all. Yet here and there, against all odds, defiant little shoots reached up from the soil like survivors. Ntombi appeared minutes later, tying her braids behind her head with a rubber band. She looked surprised but not displeased. You weren't joking, she said. I rarely do, Elon replied, brushing dust off a bench before sitting. But I'm serious about this. Without another word, she handed him gloves and a rusted trowel. Together, they began to clear what could be salvaged. As the sun rose higher, more hands joined. Dinio arrived with a crate of seedlings she had started in her windowsill. Thabo hobbled up the stairs, refusing help, armed with a beat-up transistor radio and small speaker. He turned it on and music filtered into the air. Miriam Makeba, Humasakila, the sounds of generations dancing through hardship. Mpho appeared last, holding a small, still-blooming marigold wrapped in newspaper. Everyone stopped when she placed it gently at the center of the garden, where a sunbeam caught its yellow petals like a blessing. They worked in waves. Elon found himself hammering together wooden boxes with an old man named Khumalo, who once taught physics in Soweto. They shared theories on irrigation between stories about first crushes and near fistfights during dominoes. At one point, Elon laughed so hard he spilled compost on his own shoes. By mid-morning, half the space had been transformed. Weeds became mulch. Beds were outlined. Elon built a rain catchment barrel from scrap and old tubing that Ntombi sourced from a back shed. Everyone contributed something: muscle, memory, or laughter. The garden began to breathe again. During a break, Elon sat beside Mpho under a patched parasol. She sipped tea from a chipped ceramic cup and watched the activity with calm eyes. "You're sweating," she said, smirking. "I know," he replied. "It's disgusting." "It's human," she corrected. He looked at her. "This place, it's more than a garden, isn't it?" She nodded slowly. "It's the last part of ourselves we haven't given up to the world outside. We come here to feel needed again, to remember we still matter." Elon was quiet for a while. Then he asked, "Why didn't anyone tell me it was falling apart?" "We don't ask for what we think the world's already decided we don't deserve." He blinked. That struck deeper than he expected. Before he left, he helped carry the bags of refuse down to the alley. The others cheered as they finished replanting the herb wall. The sun was beginning to soften again, golden against the tips of the trees. "I'll be back tomorrow," Elon said, brushing his hands clean. "You better be," Ntombi replied. And as he descended the creaky stairs, he realized he hadn't thought about Mars, quarterly earnings, or shareholder meetings all morning. He had been present, and it felt like oxygen. That night, Elon couldn't sleep. The rooftop garden lingered in his mind like the scent of soil under fingernails. He made tea, rooibos strong, and sat at his writing desk, which had collected dust from disuse. For years, he had communicated through voice notes, executive summaries, encrypted chats. But now, something demanded ink and paper. He took out a thick cream-colored sheet and began writing. "To the Moonlight Club, and to everyone I left behind without knowing I had." The words poured out slower than his usual brilliance. They didn't sparkle with innovation or urgency. Instead, they were soft confessions. He wrote about arriving at the club in his early 20s, a loner with ambition and no language for community. He wrote about the fear of being ordinary, the arrogance he mistook for confidence, the love he sensed but never let in. He wrote Mpho's poem, of the marigold, of Ntombi's sarcasm, and Tabo's offbeat humor. And at the end he wrote, "This time I won't disappear." He folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it with wax. It felt like sealing a promise. The next day, he returned to the club and found the garden in full motion. Ntombi had invited some school children to help water the beds. Dinio had brought homemade lemonade. Even Cabello had returned with a jar of homemade fertilizer. When Elon handed the envelope to Mpho, she didn't open it immediately. She just held it in both hands as though it was warm. She looked at him and simply said, "Thank you." Later that afternoon, Tabo summoned everyone to the main hall. He had a surprise, he said. Standing under a flickering light bulb, he cleared his throat and read aloud from a handwritten note of his own. "I wanted to write this before my memory gives out. For years, we feared being forgotten. But when Elon came back, we bent down and pulled weeds with us. Something shifted. Not because he's rich or famous, but because he listened." He paused, wiping his eyes. "Some of us are leaving soon. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And it matters that we leave knowing our story won't end here." Applause was slow, then thunderous. Not for Elon, for all of them. That night, as the club emptied and Elon stood under the jacaranda tree, Mpho came beside him. "We're planning a night garden. Solar lights, lavender beds, benches for couples who think no one's watching." He smiled. "Need help drawing the layout?" "No, but we need you to keep showing up." He nodded. They stood there, side by side, watching leaves flutter in the breeze, like small, brave departures. Above them, the moon rose quietly over Pretoria, shining down on an old building that felt newer with every passing day. The following week passed like a gentle tide. Elon came to the Moonlight Club every day, slipping into its rhythm with unexpected ease. He watered the rooftop garden before meetings, helped with light repairs in the afternoon, and shared supper under the moonlight more than once. It was the first time in years he wasn't rushing towards something. Instead, he was simply arriving. But that peace was interrupted on Thursday evening when he found an old man seated alone in the garden, staring at the fig tree in the corner. He had a thin face, leathery skin, and eyes like wet coal. "Mpho said I might find you here," the man said without turning. "I'm Joseph." Elon nodded. He'd heard the name before, whispers of a lost co-founder of the club, someone who disappeared decades ago under circumstances no one dared explain. Joseph finally looked at him. "You don't remember me, but I remember you. I taught a workshop here years ago. You were always early, never stayed long." "I wasn't good at staying," Elon admitted. Joseph gestured toward the fig tree. "That's where the club started. Just a few of us, tired of being forgotten. We met here after work, nurses, teachers, clerks. We brought food, instruments, and stories. We called it Moonlight Democracy. No titles, no shame." He looked away again. But time changed everything. Some people left for better jobs. Some died. And some of us, like me, left without saying goodbye. Elon sat beside him. The sun had dipped behind the buildings, casting the garden in a quiet hush. "I thought I was protecting the club," Joseph said. "Truth is, I was just afraid of watching it fall apart." Elon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled from his bag a small box, a weather sensor he'd been meaning to install on the roof to help regulate the garden's moisture levels. "We can still protect it," he said, "but now together." Joseph chuckled, the sound like gravel shifting. "You think the future starts with gadgets?" "No," Elon replied, "but sometimes it needs tools to bloom." That night, Mpho read poetry by candlelight while Ntombi and Thabo prepared spicy lentil stew for the group. Joseph stayed longer than anyone expected. He even smiled when a toddler, the grandchild of one of the members, climbed into his lap and began drawing on his arm with a purple crayon. And under the jacaranda tree, Elon sat silently beside the fig tree, thinking about roots. How deep they must go to hold memories in place. How hard it is to let them be seen. Later, Ntombi handed him a folder. "These are the club's old records," she said. "Donations, notes, poetry, receipts from decades ago. Most of it's faded, but maybe you'll see something worth keeping." Elon opened the folder and saw a photograph tucked inside. It was his younger self, barely 21, sitting on the edge of the club's front steps, alone, reading a book. Someone had written on the back, "Still learning to belong." He closed it, the quiet wrapping around him like a familiar blanket. Tomorrow, he promised himself, he would digitize it all. The stories, the names, the poems. No one else would disappear. The day of the Moonlight Club's official re-inauguration arrived with the scent of rain in the air. The garden was in full bloom, the rooftops strung with solar fairy lights, and lanterns shaped like tiny moons swayed in the soft wind. Word had spread across Pretoria, and by late afternoon, people had started gathering, former members, their children, curious neighbors, journalists who were told to come without cameras. Inside, Mpho sat in the main hall getting her hair gently braided by Ntombi. She wore earrings shaped like stars and held Elon's letter in her lap, now read so many times that the edges had softened. Elon arrived last, walking through the courtyard in silence. Everyone noticed, but no one clapped. Instead, they simply stepped aside and let him move among them, like a brother returning from far away. Thabo took the small stage and raised a glass of sweet red wine. "We've come together not to start something new," he said, "but to remember what never stopped. A place that let us age without shame, that let us love without condition, And that now lets us continue. He raised his glass toward Elon. We don't thank you for the money, Elon Musk. We thank you for the time, the laughter, the listening. Everyone joined in the toast. Elon nodded, quietly touched. Later, people danced slowly in the courtyard. Mpho led a circle of poetry where children took turns reading lines from old notebooks. One of them read a poem Elon had written at 23 and left behind in a drawer, never published. He didn't remember writing it, but the final verse pulled something loose in his chest. Some lights burn loud, some burn low, but the ones that matter stay. He closed his eyes and exhaled. As the night deepened, he climbed the stairs to the rooftop. Alone this time, the marigolds had doubled in number. The lavender was fragrant. The moon above shone full, serene, and low. Footsteps approached. It was Mpho. Thought you might be up here, she said. It's quiet, he answered. Sometimes silence is the most honest conversation. She handed him a small package. Inside was a silver key. It was worn, cool to the touch. It opens the club, she said. In case we're not around someday, you'll know what to do. Elon didn't speak. He simply took the key and slipped it into his coat. Pretoria shimmered below them, a million small lights blinking in the dark. And on the rooftop of a modest building on Mpho Street, two old friends stood side by side, not thinking of rockets or regrets, but of roots, of gardens, of moonlight, and of staying.